After the mother's departure, a little girl took on the responsibility of caring for her baby brother alone. The stepmother, manipulative and cold, turned a small mistake into cruelty. She ordered the two to sleep in the doghouse. What she didn't expect was that the millionaire father would arrive at the exact moment of the punishment. 2 minutes later, his actions silenced the stepmother and changed the fate of that house. Clara's thin arms trembled under the weight of little Leo. At 8 years old, she shouldn't have felt this kind of deep exhaustion, the kind that seemed to seep into her bones and turn every step into a battle. The mansion where they lived, with its vast, silent hallways, felt like it was swallowing her whole. It was a place built with her father's immense fortune, a man who amassed wealth and assets as easily as he breathed, but who lately seemed to have forgotten that money couldn't buy human warmth. Since her mother had left, leaving a void that echoed off the marble walls, Clara had taken on a silent mission to protect Leo. He was just a baby, a few months old, oblivious to the coldness that surrounded them, and his cry was the only thing that seemed to crack the perfect facade of that house. That Tuesday afternoon, exhaustion won out over vigilance. Clara had spent the previous night soothing her brother, who was suffering from the pain of his first teeth, while her stepmother, Elena, slept soundly in her soundproofed master suite. Her father, Robert, was on another business trip, perhaps in New York or London, checking the cash flow of his companies or evaluating new assets to expand his empire. He always said he worked so hard to secure their future so they would never want for anything. Clara knew he loved them, but his blindness when it came to Elena was an open wound in the little girl's heart. With heavy eyes, Clara sat on the Italian velvet sofa in the living room, trying to finish her homework while Leo napped in her lap. The math problems danced in front of her. Without realizing it, she drifted off for a few minutes. She woke with a start to a whimper from Leo and, in her haste, rushed to take him to his crib, forgetting her school notebook open on the impeccable upholstery. It was a tiny mistake, a child's oversight, but in that house, under Elena's reign, there were no small mistakes. Elena entered the room with the bearing of a dissatisfied queen. Her eyes, always sweeping the space for flaws, landed immediately on the simple spiral notebook that clashed with the luxurious decor. She picked it up with her fingertips as if it were contaminated. "Clara!" Her voice wasn't loud, but it was as sharp as ice. Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, her heart already racing. She knew that tone. "Yes, ma'am. What have I told you about leaving your trash all over my living room?" Elena held up the notebook. "We have important people here. Investors, your father's partners. What would they think if they saw this mess, that we have no discipline, that this house is a state of anarchy?" Clara descended the stairs slowly, gripping the banister tightly. "I'm sorry. I was watching Leo and I dozed off for a second. Don't give me pathetic excuses," Elena interrupted, snapping the notebook shut. "You always use your brother as a shield for your laziness. If you can't be responsible for a simple notebook, how do you expect me to trust you with anything else?" "It wasn't laziness, I swear." Clara's eyes welled up, but she swallowed her tears. She knew tears only irritated her stepmother more. Eleanor walked toward her, invading her personal space, exuding an expensive perfume that she, to Clara, smelled of fear. "Your father works day and night to give us this luxury, and you repay him with sloppiness. He needs to know that I'm bringing order to this house. But don't worry, I won't bother him with your failings right now. I'll teach you the value of discipline myself." She paused dramatically, a cold smile curving her perfectly painted lips. "Since you enjoy acting like an ill-mannered little animal, you'll sleep where they sleep. Tonight, you and your precious brother will learn a lesson." Clara's eyes widened, terror seizing her chest. "What? You're sleeping in the doghouse, in the backyard?" Elena pronounced with terrifying calm, "Perhaps out there in the cold and the cramped space, you'll learn to appreciate the comfort your father provides, the comfort you so clearly despise with your mess. And don't you dare complain, or it will be worse." Night fell over the garden like a cold and heavy shroud. Clara, with Leo nestled in her arms, was led by Elena to the wooden doghouse in the back of the property. The structure, though well built for Sultan, the family's German shepherd, was no place for children. The smell of damp earth and dog fur hung in the air. Clara laid her baby brother on an old blanket Eleanor tossed inside, folding it several times to create a minimal barrier against the hard floor. Then she curled up beside him, using her own body as a shield against the cold breeze that seeped through the cracks. Every sound of the night, the rustling of leaves, the distant wail of a siren, made her flinch. She didn't cry. The tears felt frozen inside her, transformed into a knot of dread in her throat. Her only focus was to keep Leo warm, to ensure he slept without feeling the harshness of this punishment. She thought of her father, picturing him in a board meeting talking about capital growth, about the ROI on some tech stock investment, completely oblivious to the fact that his children were being treated with less dignity than the family dog. The next morning, when the kitchen door opened, it was Lucy, one of the oldest housekeepers, who found them. Her dark, kind eyes widened for an instant, a mixture of shock and pity crossing her face before she could mask it. Lucy helped them inside, in silence, and prepared a warm bottle for Leo. For Clara, however, breakfast was scarce. Elena appeared in the kitchen, impeccably dressed, and announced with venomous sweetness that, due to Clara's lack of energy to maintain order, she wouldn't need much food. Half a slice of toast and a glass of milk. It was enough, she said. In the days that followed, the rule held. Clara's portions shrank with every small infraction. One of Leo's toys out of place, a delay in answering a call. In public, in front of other staff, Elena humiliated her with phrases disguised as concern. "Clara, darling, you seem so scattered. You need to try harder, or people will think you aren't very bright." Desperate, Clara felt she had no other choice. She had to reach her father. One afternoon, while Elena was at a charity event, ironically, to raise funds for underprivileged children, Clara took a piece of paper and a pencil, hidden in her father's small home office, sitting in the leather chair that smelled like him. She wrote. She told him about the doghouse, about the hunger, about the fear she felt. The words were blurred by the tears that finally dared to fall. She folded the letter into a tiny square, planning to give it to the driver the next morning. But Elena seemed to have a sixth sense for disobedience. That very night, while tidying Clara's room with feigned diligence, she found the paper hidden under the pillow. The confrontation was silent and terrible. Elena didn't scream. She simply unfolded the letter and read it in front of Clara, a smirk growing on her face. "You fool! Do you really think he would believe you over me? He's far too busy securing the fortune you'll one day inherit to worry about your childish little dramas." With deliberate calm, Elena tore the letter into tiny pieces, letting them fall to the floor like dirty snow. It was in that moment that Clara's hope shattered. She understood she was utterly alone, trapped in a web woven with her father's money and her stepmother's cruelty. As she stared at the fragments of her words on the floor, she saw, through the crack in the door, the shadow of Lucy, who watched the scene for a split second before pulling away. In the housekeeper's eyes, Clara saw more than pity. She saw a contained anger, a secret solidarity that lit a tiny spark in the darkness. Elena moved closer, kneeling to be at Clara's eye level, and whispered, her voice lethally soft, "If you ever try a stunt like this again, I swear it won't just be your food that disappears. I'll start watering down your brother's formula. Let's see how brave you are when he starts crying from hunger." Elena's threat hung over the house like a toxic cloud, invisible to everyone but Clara. From that moment on, the girl's silence ceased to be just a response to fear and became a survival strategy. She transformed into a small guardian, an 8-year-old sentry whose sole purpose was to watch over her brother's well-being. Every bottle Elena prepared was inspected by her watchful eyes. Clara would smell the formula, check its color, looking for any sign that the cruel promise was being kept. Elena, noticing this new vigilance, was amused by the game. Sometimes she would hold the bottle for an extra moment, looking at Clara with a mocking smile before handing it over, savoring the helpless panic in the child's eyes. The house, once a home, was now a minefield of psychological manipulation, and Clara was learning to navigate it with exhaustive care. Her only relief came in furtive gestures from Lucy. The housekeeper never spoke openly about what she saw. She knew she would risk her job, her only source of income, and the chance to stay near the children. But her kindness manifested in small, silent rebellions. A cookie left accidentally on the kitchen counter within Clara's reach. A slightly fuller bowl of soup on a day when Elena was distracted on the phone. Discussing the interest rates on some investment, a gentle touch on Clara's shoulder as she passed her in the hall. They were crumbs of affection, but to the girl, they were worth more than all the gold her father kept in distant vaults. These moments forged an invisible bond between them, an alliance of glances and understanding that told Clara she wasn't going crazy, that the cruelty she felt was real. One day, Clara heard Elena's voice coming from her father's office. She crept closer, her small body hidden by the half-open door. Elena was on the phone with Robert, her voice a melody of falsehood. "Yes, darling, everything is wonderful here," she cooed. "Clara is becoming such a responsible young lady. You should see her. She looks after Leo as if he were a treasure. Our little investment in discipline is paying excellent dividends. You can be sure of that. She understands that everything we do is to protect our family's assets." Clara's stomach churned. Hearing those lies, spoken so naturally, was like a punch to the gut. The image her father had of her was being sculpted, day by day, by Elena's hands, and she could do nothing to stop it. The castle of love and trust she thought she had with her father was being demolished, brick by brick, and he didn't even notice. Later, Elena gathered the staff in the dining room to announce that Robert would be back soon and they would host a small dinner for some important partners. "Everything must be perfect," she declared, her eyes scanning each of them. "This family's image, our assets, everything is on the line when we host people of this caliber." She assigned tasks with military precision and, to everyone's surprise, turned to Clara. "And you, Clara, will be responsible for a very special task. I want you to arrange the place cards on the table. It's simple, but it requires attention. One mistake could cause tremendous embarrassment." The task was insignificant, but the weight of the warning was clear. It was a test, a trap. After dismissing the others, Elena gripped Clara's arm, her red-painted nails digging slightly into her skin. "By the way," she said, the cold smile back on her lips, "your father called again. His trip has been extended. He'll be gone for another week." Clara's heart sank. Another week, an eternity. "Now it'll be just us girls," Elena whispered, bringing her face close. "We'll have plenty of time to continue your lessons, with no interruptions." The extra week her father would be away stretched before Clara like an endless desert. Each hour seemed longer, each day heavier under Eleanor's watchful eye. The preparation for the business dinner became the new stage for the stepmother's cruelty. The task of the place cards, which seemed so simple, transformed into an instrument of psychological torture. Eleanor changed the guest list daily, claiming last-minute cancellations and new confirmations. With each change, Clara had to rewrite all the names in her childish, trembling handwriting, rearranging the seating according to a complex protocol Eleanor invented on the spot. Mr. Tanaka detests sitting with his back to the door. It affects his energy flow, she would say with grave seriousness. And Mrs. Dubois must be next to someone who understands the art market, or she'll get bored and might influence her husband not to close the deal. They were absurd rules, designed to confuse and exhaust. As she hunched over the cards, with Leo fussing in a playpen beside her, Clara felt her eyelids grow heavy. Her attention at school plummeted, and her teacher had already sent a note home, which Elena promptly intercepted. "Look at this, Clara," the stepmother said, waving the paper in her face. "Proof of your negligence. How can your father entrust the family inheritance to someone who can't even pay attention in class?" The word inheritance sounded strange to Clara. She didn't want assets. She wanted her father's hug. The fatigue was so profound that one afternoon she made a mistake. She misspelled Mr. Sterling with a U. Elena saw the slip-up and, instead of simply asking her to fix it, tore up the card and made Clara start the entire stack of 20 names over. Precision is everything, Clara. A small mistake here could cost millions on a contract. Your father's profit depends on the image of perfection we project. Lucy watched from a distance, her heart tight with helplessness. One day, while Elena was on the phone discussing the profitability of some mutual funds, Lucy approached the table where Clara was working and, pretending to dust, whispered the correct sequence of names she had overheard Elena confirm minutes earlier. The gesture was swift, an act of complicity that lasted seconds but gave Clara the strength to continue. She finished the task, arranging the cards in impeccable order on a silver tray. For a moment, she felt a pang of pride. Maybe, just maybe, Elena would be satisfied. A thread of hope. That night, exhausted, Clara lay in bed and a memory surfaced. A rainy afternoon before Elena, when her father had cancelled an important meeting to stay with her. They had assembled a 1,000-piece puzzle on the living room floor, and when she fit the last piece, he had lifted her into the air and said, "You're the smartest girl in the world, my treasure." The memory was so sweet and so painful that a single tear trickled down her temple. Where was that man? How could he not see what was happening in his own house, to his own treasure? The illusion of having pleased Elena was short-lived. On the morning of the dinner, her stepmother entered Clara's room before the sun was even up. She was holding the silver tray with the place cards. With a smile as thin as a razor blade, she tipped the tray, letting all the cards flutter to the floor in a jumbled mess. "How clumsy of me," she said, her voice falsely sweet. "It seems you'll have to arrange them all over again, and be quick about it. The guests arrive in a few hours. If a single one of them sits in the wrong place tonight, the fault will be entirely yours. And you remember what happens to little girls who cause me trouble, don't you? The backyard misses you." The cold marble floor was covered with the small cardstock rectangles. With trembling hands and eyes burning from lack of sleep, Clara knelt to pick them up, one by one. The name of each guest, of each multi-millionaire who helped build her father's fortune, seemed to mock her. Time was her enemy. With every passing minute, panic rose in her chest like a dark tide. Leo, sensing his sister's distress, began to cry in his crib. It was a cry of hunger and discomfort, a sound that to Clara was a fire alarm. She tried to ignore it, focusing on the names, on the order, but his cries intertwined with her fear, creating a symphony of despair. It was Lucy who, in a silent act of courage, appeared at the bedroom door. Her eyes met Clara's, and without a word, she went to the crib, picked up Leo, and whispered, "I'll change his diaper and give him his bottle in the kitchen. Take all the time you need." Clara nodded, an immense, silent gratitude flooding her heart. With the room quiet, she managed to concentrate, and her fingers, though still trembling, moved with more certainty. Hours later, the mansion pulsed with a different energy. The scent of expensive flowers and sophisticated food wafted through the air. The guests began to arrive, men in impeccable suits and women adorned with jewels that glittered like fallen stars. The conversations revolved around topics Clara didn't understand, but whose words she now knew. The stock market, assets, profitability, the price of gold, the future of cryptocurrency. It was her father's world, a world of numbers and deals that seemed so distant and cold. Elena was the perfect hostess, gliding among the guests with a radiant smile, the personification of elegance and success. She paused beside Clara for a moment as the girl put the final touch on the dining table. "Is everything in order?" she asked, her voice low and menacing, a stark contrast to the smile on her face. "A single mistake, and you know the consequences." Clara retreated to the kitchen, her heart pounding. From there, she could hear the laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, Eleanor's voice charming everyone. She felt like a ghost in her own home. Lucy gave her a glass of water and a piece of bread, which she ate standing up, hidden from view. The dinner began. The courses were served. Everything ran with rehearsed perfection. Clara was instructed to stay in the hallway connecting the dining room to the kitchen, invisible but ready for any eventuality. And then the sound she dreaded most cut through the air. From upstairs, Leo's crying began, soft at first, but quickly escalating into a sharp, desperate wail. Instinctively, Clara's body moved toward the stairs. She had to get to him, but as she took the first step, her eyes met Elena's from the head of the lavish table. Elena said nothing, just a look, cold, hard, cutting, and a nearly imperceptible shake of her head, a silent command that froze her in place. "Don't move!" Leo's cries grew louder, more urgent. One of the guests, a white-haired gentleman, frowned, unsettled by the sound. "Sounds like the young heir needs some attention," he remarked. Eleanor then executed her masterstroke. She sighed, a sound heavy with false, weary resignation, and placed her silver fork beside her plate. In a voice brimming with martyred sweetness, she addressed the entire table. "My apologies, everyone. The nanny has the day off, and I asked Clara, my stepdaughter, to keep an eye on her little brother." She cast a look of disappointment toward the hallway where Clara was hidden. "But it seems she's still too young to understand certain responsibilities. I suppose I'll have to handle this myself." The echo of Elena's words ricocheted down the hall, each syllable a blow to Clara's chest. Humiliation and helplessness pinned her to the spot. She heard her stepmother's footsteps ascending the stairs, the murmurs of sympathy from the guests, and then silence. Leo's crying stopped abruptly. Clara imagined what was happening upstairs, and her fear for her brother surpassed her own pain. Minutes later, Elena descended, a serene smile on her face, like a saint who had just performed a miracle. "It was just a bit of a fuss," she announced to the table. "He just needed a firm hand. Children test boundaries, don't they?" Clara, poor dear, still gets very flustered. She has a good heart, but she lacks the maturity to handle the pressures of a household like ours. The guests' heads nodded in agreement, and the dinner continued, the small family drama serving only to highlight the hostess's virtues. No one questioned it. After all, in a world where success was measured in dollars and euros, the facade of a perfect family was a priceless asset. When the last luxury car had left the driveway, Elena's mask dropped. She found Clara in the kitchen, where the girl was helping Lucy stack plates. Elena's voice was a chilling whisper, more frightening than any shout. "You tried to embarrass me tonight. You tried to sabotage a night that was crucial for your father's business." "I didn't. I just heard Leo crying," Clara stammered, backing away until she hit the granite countertop. "You heard an opportunity," Eleanor corrected, "an opportunity to get attention, to play the victim, but it backfired, didn't it? Everyone saw what I see every day, a spoiled, incapable little girl." Lucy, who'd been keeping her head down, drying a crystal goblet, couldn't help herself. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice respectful but firm. The girl was just worried. It's natural. Elena turned slowly to face the housekeeper. A heavy silence filled the kitchen. Are you questioning my methods of raising these children, Lucy? No, ma'am. Not at all. You are just encouraging her laziness. Elena cut in. Your loyalty seems to be misplaced. Remember who signs your paycheck. Remember that your income depends on your discretion and your good sense. The threat hung in the air, clear and sharp. Lucy lowered her eyes. Defeated, Clara felt a new wave of fear. Now she feared not only for herself and Leo, but also for the one person who showed her kindness. Elena turned her attention back to Clara, her gaze triumphant. Since you've demonstrated such an ineptitude for simple tasks, we'll have to step up your training. Starting tonight, to unburden the household, and as you heard me say, you will be entirely responsible for Leo during the night. Clara's jaw dropped. But what about school? You'll manage. Real mothers manage. You'll sleep in his room. That way, when he cries, he won't disturb the rest of the house, and he won't disturb me. I consider this an excellent solution for your development. Later that night, Lucy couldn't sleep. The injustice was suffocating. She got up and, in the dim light of the kitchen, pulled a small notebook and a pen from a hidden pocket in her apron. She sat at the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. She glanced at the door, fearful, but the need to act was stronger. She opened the notebook to a blank page and began to write. She noted the date, the time, and, in her careful script, described what had happened at dinner: Clara's humiliation, Elena's lie, the new punishment. Every written word was a risk, but it was also an act of resistance. She could not speak, but she could record. She could create an archive of the truth, a silent weapon against the tyranny that had settled into this house of gold and suffering. As she wrote, her hand trembled, not with fear, but with a newfound determination. The new nightly routine was a crushing burden for Clara's small shoulders. She moved to an uncomfortable armchair next to Leo's crib, where she spent her nights in a state of constant vigilance, starting at her brother's slightest stir. Sleep became a rare luxury, fragmented into brief naps between feedings, diaper changes, and long periods of pacing the room, rocking the crying baby. During the day, exhaustion turned her into a shadow. At school, the teacher's words became an indistinct drone, and the girl struggled to keep her eyes open, her heavy head lolling over her notebook. Her once perfect grades plummeted. The childish mistakes became more frequent. A glass of juice spilled on the Egyptian linen tablecloth. The garden door left ajar. Each failure was another nail Elena hammered into the coffin of Clara's reputation. Useless and lazy, the stepmother would sigh in front of the other staff, shaking her head with false sadness. I try, I really do, but she seems to be a lost cause. It's a shame, with all the investment her father makes in her education. The image of the problem child solidified, while that of Elena, the patient and dedicated stepmother, grew ever brighter. She controlled the narrative with the skill of a master puppeteer, and Clara was her broken marionette. Lucy, meanwhile, continued her secret chronicle, the small notebook filled with dates, times, and detailed descriptions of the veiled cruelty she witnessed. It was a dangerous document, the only proof that Clara's sanity wasn't fraying, but being systematically attacked. She kept the notebook in an empty cookie tin at the back of her closet, a treasure of truths in an ocean of lies. One day, her father called. Elena put him on speakerphone, one of her favorite methods of torturing Clara, who was nearby, tidying Leo's toys. Robert's voice sounded tired but affectionate, coming from thousands of miles away. "How are my treasures?" he asked. Elena answered with her usual sweetness, telling him about the business dinner, about how fast Leo was growing. And then she sighed. "Clara, oh, Robert. She worries me a little. She's so distracted, so forgetful. The school called again. I didn't want to burden you with this, but maybe we need to think about professional help. She doesn't seem to be coping well with everything." Clara's heart went cold. Elena was suggesting she had problems, that she was unstable. It was her most wicked move yet. On the other end of the line, her father hesitated. "Are you sure, darling? She's always been so bright." "Exactly," Elena replied. "This sudden change is what's so concerning, but don't you worry about it now. You focus on closing that deal. We're taking care of everything here." The call ended, and Elena looked at Clara with a victorious smile. The girl felt the floor disappear from beneath her. Her father, her last hope, was being convinced that she was the problem. Despair engulfed her. That night, exhaustion and anguish finally defeated her. While rocking Leo, she fell fast asleep in the armchair, the baby still in her arms. Hours later, she woke with a jolt. The room was freezing. In her sleep, she had shifted and accidentally kicked the small, heavy fire guard in front of the decorative fireplace. The guard toppled over with a metallic clang that thankfully didn't wake Leo, but the gash it left on the hardwood floor was deep and unmistakable, a visible, permanent scar. The next day, as Elena was preparing to leave for lunch with friends, the house phone rang. It was Robert. His voice, however, was not that of someone calling for a casual chat. There was an urgency to it. "Elena, listen carefully," he said, his voice clipped. "There's been an unexpected complication. The deal's been postponed. I'm at the airport. My private jet takes off in an hour. I'll be home tonight." The news of Robert's early return landed in the mansion like a silent bomb. For Clara, it was a flash of hope in the storm, so intense it nearly took her breath away. Her father was coming back. The mere idea of his presence, his scent, his hug, was a balm to her wounded soul. She clung to this expectation like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of driftwood. Maybe, if she could just talk to him, alone, for 5 minutes, he would listen. He would believe her. He would see the truth behind Elena's eyes. This fragile hope was all she had. For Elena, however, the news was an irritating setback, an abrupt change to the script she had so carefully directed. Her face tightened for a split second, a crack in her mask of perfection, before she composed herself. She would have to accelerate her plans, to solidify Clara's image as a troubled child before Robert could form his own conclusions. And the perfect opportunity was right there, scratched into the wooden floor of Leo's room. That morning, the maid had found the damage by the fireplace and, terrified, had reported it immediately to Elena. The stepmother went to the room and surveyed the deep gash. She didn't scream or make a scene. She just smiled, a slow, calculated smile that sent a shiver down the spine of Clara, who was watching from the doorway. Eleanor walked over to the girl, knelt in front of her, and said in a falsely gentle voice, "Oh, darling, what did you do? Your father will be so disappointed. This wood was imported from Italy. It cost a fortune. He values the assets he's built so much, every detail of this house." The tone wasn't one of anger, but of a poisonous pity that was infinitely worse. "Don't worry," she continued, stroking Clara's hair. "We'll find a way to fix this before he gets here." But Clara knew what that "we" meant. Throughout the day, the tension in the house was palpable. Elena instructed the staff to prepare Robert's favorite meal, to choose the best wine from the cellar, everything to create a scene of normalcy and welcome. However, she made sure the door to Leo's room remained open, the scratch on the floor visible to anyone walking down the hall. It was a piece of evidence, deliberately left at the crime scene. Lucy, sensing the maneuver, discreetly tried to place a rug over the mark, but Elena intercepted her. "Leave it, Lucy. We mustn't hide our mistakes. Taking responsibility is the first step toward maturity." Clara spent the day in a state of feverish anxiety. She tried to get close to Lucy, searching her eyes for confirmation, a strategy, anything. But Lucy was more cautious than ever, knowing Elena's eyes were everywhere. The housekeeper only offered her a quick, meaningful look as she handed her a glass of milk, a look that said, "Be strong, hold on." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara heard the familiar sound of her father's car approaching on the long gravel driveway. Her heart leaped, a mix of joy and dread. He was home. The judge had arrived in the courtroom. She ran to her bedroom window just in time to see him get out of the car. He looked tired. His shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of business and travel, but then he lifted his face toward the house, and for an instant his eyes seemed to meet hers in the window. A small smile formed on his lips. In that moment, Clara's hope flared to life. He loved her. He would never let anything bad happen to her. She ran down the stairs, her heart light for the first time in weeks. "Daddy!" she cried, ready to throw herself into his arms. But as she reached the entrance hall, she stopped short. Eleanor was already there, wrapped in Robert's embrace, and as she kissed him, her eyes met Clara's over her husband's shoulder. They were cold, victorious eyes that carried an unmistakable message. "The show is about to begin, and you're the villain." The welcome home dinner was a masterpiece of deception. Elena narrated the events of the past weeks with a skill that turned cruelty into care and neglect into concern. She painted a picture of herself as a dedicated stepmother, patiently battling the rebellion and distraction of a difficult child. The scratch on the floor was presented not as an accident born of exhaustion, but as the climax of a series of destructive behaviors. "I know it's just material things, darling," she said, placing her hand on Robert's, her voice thick with fake emotion. "What truly worries me is what's behind it. This pent-up anger, this lack of respect for our home, for your work, for everything you've built for us." Robert, weary from his trip and susceptible to the carefully orchestrated atmosphere, listened with a growing expression of concern. He looked at Clara, sitting across the table, picking at her food with no appetite, and saw not his exhausted and frightened daughter, but the image Elena was projecting, a problem child he no longer recognized. Clara tried to defend herself, but her voice was a thin thread against the torrent of well-articulated accusations. "It was an accident, Daddy. I was sleepy because—" "Because you're irresponsible, Clara," Eleanor interrupted, with the sweetness of a razor. "You need to learn that our actions have consequences. There's no point in making excuses." Every word from Elena was a shovelful of dirt burying the truth. Robert, torn between his love for his daughter and his trust in his wife, sighed. His brow furrowed in a mix of confusion and disappointment. "Clara, we will discuss this tomorrow," he said, his voice heavy. "Now, finish your dinner. Your stepmother is right. You need to understand the value of things." The sentence was a devastating blow. He had called her your stepmother, not Elena. A small change in pronoun that created a chasm between them. That night, Clara didn't cry. She felt hollow, emptied of all tears. The hope that had bloomed with her father's arrival had withered and died in a matter of hours. She understood that she was more alone than ever, trapped not only by Elena's cruelty, but also by the blindness of the man she loved most in the world. In the days that followed, the dynamic of the house shifted. Robert tried to reconnect with his children, but his gestures were hesitant, mediated through Elena's filter. He spent more time in his office, immersed in spreadsheets about the family's portfolio, their investment funds, and the fluctuations of his stocks, perhaps seeking refuge in the concrete world of numbers where everything was logical and predictable. Elena, feeling victorious, tightened her grip. She began assigning Clara increasingly heavy household chores disguised as occupational therapy, polishing the silverware, organizing the library books alphabetically, tedious, endless tasks that kept her isolated and occupied. "This will help her focus her energy on something constructive," she would explain to Robert, who would nod, relieved to see a solution in progress. Lucy watched the girl's deepening suffering with growing anguish. Her notebook grew denser, its pages filled with an injustice that cried out to be revealed. One afternoon, as Clara polished a silver candelabra in the pantry, tears streaming silently down her face and smudging the metal, Lucy approached. She said nothing. She simply picked up a cloth and began polishing the other candelabra beside the girl. The gesture was simple, but loaded with meaning. It was an act of solidarity, a silent declaration that she saw, she knew, and she was there. For a few minutes, the two worked in silence, the only sound the soft rhythm of cloth against silver. In that moment, Clara felt a genuine human connection, a warmth that the luxury of that cold mansion could never provide. She was not completely alone. She had an ally who, unbeknownst to her, secretly held the weapon that could set her free. But Eleanor's oppression was far from over. In fact, she was just beginning to plan her final punishment, the lesson that, in her twisted mind, would put Clara in her place once and for all. The scratch on the floor had only been the pretext. The real storm was yet to come. The atmosphere in the mansion became suffocating. Clara moved through the house like a small ghost, her presence increasingly faded by exhaustion and the weight of despair. Her father, though physically present, was emotionally distant, lost in a labyrinth of business concerns and blinded by the web of lies Elena had woven. He saw his daughter's fatigue, her paleness, but he interpreted it all through the lens his wife provided. It was rebellion, apathy, a difficult phase that required a firm hand. The brief moments when he tried to connect with her were always sabotaged. If he invited her to read a story, Elena would appear with an urgent task for the girl. If he suggested a walk in the garden, Elena would remind him that Clara needed to finish her responsibilities to learn discipline. He, wanting to believe he was doing what was best for his family and avoiding conflict, would yield. Each concession was another link in the chain that bound Clara. The bond between the girl and Lucy, however, deepened in the language of silence and furtive gestures. One day, while organizing the pantry, Lucy accidentally dropped a small chocolate bar near where Clara was cleaning the floor. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, a mutual understanding passing between them. Clara hid the chocolate in her pocket, feeling the warmth of the small act of rebellion and affection. It wasn't just the candy. It was proof that someone in the house still saw her as a child who deserved a treat, not a problem to be fixed. Lucy, for her part, felt the danger of her actions. Eleanor watched her with growing suspicion, her cold eyes following the housekeeper's every move. Lucy's loyalty was a threat to her absolute control, and she would not tolerate insubordination. Elena's opportunity to reassert her power came on a Sunday afternoon. The family was in the garden. Robertish, on a rare break from work, was trying to teach Clara how to push the swing where Leo sat, laughing. For a moment, it looked like a normal, happy family. But Elena watched from the porch, a calculating look in her eyes. She approached, carrying a tray of juice. As she was pouring, she stumbled slightly, spilling some of the sticky liquid on Robert's impeccably white shirt. "Oh, my goodness, how clumsy of me!" she exclaimed, looking directly at Clara. "Darling, you distracted me, coming up so suddenly behind me." Clara hadn't even moved. It was a blatant lie, but delivered with the conviction of a talented actress. Robert, more annoyed by the stain on his shirt than the cause, went inside to change. Elena stayed behind with the children. As soon as he was out of sight, her smile vanished. "You never get tired of causing trouble, do you?" she hissed at Clara. "Always in the way, always making a mess. A little stain on your father's shirt, a big stain on our family's reputation." Clara, stunned by the audacity of the lie, finally found a spark of her old strength. "I didn't do anything. You tripped on purpose." The accusation flew out before she could stop it. Elena's face hardened. The look of surprise at being challenged quickly gave way to an icy fury. "Oh, really?" she said, her voice dangerously low. "Now you lie and accuse me. I see the lessons in discipline weren't enough. You need something more, memorable, something that will teach you your place in this house once and for all." She glanced at the sky, which was beginning to darken with rain clouds, and then at Sultan's doghouse in the corner of the garden. A cruel, satisfied smile spread across her lips. "I know. Tonight you're going to get a complete experience in responsibility. You'll learn firsthand what it means to protect your brother in adverse conditions. Get ready. Your biggest lesson is about to begin." Night fell quickly, and with it came a cold wind that whipped through the garden trees and whistled through the window frames. Robert, oblivious to the sentence that had been passed in the garden, was in his office on the phone, discussing the interest on a massive loan and the need to hedge his assets against market volatility. His calm, assertive voice spoke of millions of dollars, of capital, of cash flow, a parallel, sterile universe that bore no resemblance to the drama unfolding just yards away. To him, the house was in order, his portfolio was secure, and his family was under the competent care of his wife. Elena, with terrifying composure, waited until it was almost completely dark. She lifted a sleepy Leo from his crib and handed him to Clara. "Take him," she commanded, her voice flat, "and get a blanket, just one, so you can learn to share." Clara's heart pounded uncontrollably. She glanced toward the stairs, hoping her father would appear, that a miracle would happen. But the only person she saw was Lucy, standing at the end of the hall, her face a mask of horror and helplessness. The housekeeper was holding a thicker blanket, but a glare from Elena made her retreat, the gesture of help dying before it was born. Clara grabbed the thinnest blanket from Leo's crib and, with her brother in her arms, followed her stepmother to the back door. The night air hit her like a slap. The grass was damp and cold under her bare feet. Every step toward the wooden doghouse was torture. She looked back at the warm lights of the mansion, at the windows, framing a life of wealth and comfort from which she was being brutally expelled. She was the heiress to this fortune. Yet tonight, she didn't even have the right to a safe roof over her head. Elena opened the small door of Sultan's house. The smell of dog and wet earth was strong. "Get in," she said. Clara hesitated at the entrance, her body trembling from cold and fear. It's too small in here, ma'am. Leo could get sick." "He'll be fine if his sister learns her lesson and stops causing trouble," Elena replied, her patience wearing thin. "Now get in, before I truly lose my temper." Her chest tight with a sob she didn't dare release. Clara ducked down and crawled into the confined space. It was dark, damp, and terrifyingly small. She sat on the wooden floor, arranging Leo in her lap as best she could. She wrapped the thin blanket around his tiny body, leaving her own exposed to the cold to ensure her brother stayed as warm as possible. She hugged him tightly, whispering words of comfort that were more for herself than for him. "It's going to be okay, my love. Big sister's here. I'll protect you." Outside, Elena watched the scene with grim satisfaction. It was the perfect picture of discipline, her masterpiece of control. She bent down, her face framed by the doghouse opening. "Have a good night," she said, her tone dripping with scorn. "Think hard about your mistakes. The morning will bring a new day, and hopefully a new attitude." Then, without another word, she closed the little wooden door, and the click of the latch sounded in the night silence like the closing of a cell door. The darkness inside became absolute, total. Clara held her breath, listening to Elena's footsteps fading on the grass, and then another sound began, a single drop, and then another. The first drops of the rain promised by the afternoon began to drum on the wooden roof, a slow, ominous rhythm that heralded the long, terrifying night ahead. The sound of the rain intensified, shifting from a soft patter to a hard, incessant drumming on the doghouse roof. The wind moaned outside, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Inside, the darkness was nearly solid, broken only by the thinnest slivers of light seeping through the cracks, drawing ghostly shapes in the damp air. Clara felt the cold seep into her bones, but her only focus was the small, warm body in her arms. Leo, thankfully, had fallen asleep, exhausted, his serene little face a violent contrast to the terror engulfing his sister. Clara pressed him to her chest, whispering lullabies her mother used to sing, her trembling voice mingling with the sound of the storm. Every drop of rain that managed to seep through and drip onto the floor near them was a reminder of her vulnerability. She curled herself tighter, trying to use her body as a makeshift umbrella, shielding the most precious thing she had in the world. Meanwhile, miles away in a sterile airport office, Robert was ending his call. The deal had unexpectedly collapsed. A last-minute clause, a disagreement over liabilities, and market instability had created an impasse. The trip home, once a strategic retreat, now felt like a frustrated escape. Tired and annoyed, he reached for his briefcase, but a thought stopped him. He had forgotten a crucial folder of documents in his office at home, papers related to another investment, a cryptocurrency venture that required his physical signature. The decision was instant. Instead of going to a hotel and waiting for a morning flight, he would call his pilot. He would take the private jet back tonight. The need to handle business was the perfect excuse for his sudden, inexplicable urge to be home, to see his children, to feel the solid ground of his home beneath his feet. Hours later, Robert's car glided silently up the mansion's driveway. The house lights were nearly all off, save for the one in his office, which he always left on. He got out of the car, the fine rain dampening his expensive coat. The house was silent. Strange. Normally, even late at night, there was some sound, a light on in the children's wing or the kitchen. He let himself in, feeling a chill that wasn't just from the cold. The atmosphere was wrong, heavy. He went upstairs quietly, not wanting to wake anyone. He passed Clara's room. The bed was empty, neatly made. He frowned. He went to Leo's room. The crib was also empty. A knot of apprehension began to form in his stomach. Where were they? With Elena? Perhaps he went to the master suite. The door was ajar. Elena was sleeping soundly, her breathing even and calm. Alone, panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in his throat. Where were his children? He ran down the stairs, his heart hammering. He passed through the kitchen and through the window, saw something that made no sense. A small shadow near the doghouse. With his heart in his throat, he threw open the back door and stepped out into the rain. The sound of his leather shoes sinking into the drenched lawn. As he got closer, the shadow became clearer. It was Sultan's house, and from inside he heard a voice, a small, trembling voice, his daughter's voice. He stopped, hiding behind a large hedge, the shock paralyzing him. He couldn't process what he was seeing. Why would Clara be in there? And then he heard her words, clear in the damp night air. "Don't cry, my sweet boy. Mommy will be back soon. It's just a little tight in here, but I'm keeping you warm." She was talking to Leo, and she was calling herself Mommy. In that instant, Robert's world shattered. The facade of the perfect family, Elena's sweet lies, his own willful blindness, it all disintegrated. The image of his two children, his 8-year-old girl and his infant son, huddled inside a doghouse to shelter from the rain, was a physical blow that knocked the wind out of him. A wave of pure, primal, all-consuming fury rose from his gut. This was not the cold anger of a businessman who'd lost a deal. This was the rage of a father whose most valuable treasure had been desecrated. For 2 minutes, he stood there, shaking, the sound of his own blood roaring in his ears, and then he couldn't hold it back any longer. The rage exploded. "Elena!" The cry tore through the night, a guttural sound of pain and fury echoing across the silent garden. He burst from behind the hedge and ran, rain mixing with tears of rage on his face, sprinting toward the doghouse, toward his children. Robert's shout echoed like a thunderclap, causing the mansion's lights to flicker to life. One by one, he didn't wait for a response. In 3 long strides, he reached the doghouse and tore the small wooden door off with a strength he didn't know he possessed. The wood splintered, the hinges groaned and ripped free. His eyes, adjusted to the dark, focused on the scene that would haunt him forever. His daughter, Clara, huddled and small, her eyes huge and terrified, using her own frail body to shield her baby brother from the damp cold. He fell to his knees in the mud, not caring about his expensive suit or the rain, and held out his arms. "Come here, come to Daddy." His voice broke, the rage giving way to a profound agony. Clara moved as if in a dream, clumsy in the cramped space, and crawled out, handing him the small, warm bundle that was Leo. Robert took his son, cradling him in one arm, and with the other pulled Clara close, hugging them both with a desperate strength, as if he could fuse their bodies to his, so they would never be apart again. On the patio, the back door opened. Elena appeared, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of sleepy confusion that quickly morphed into calculated alarm at the scene. Behind her, Lucy and another maid watched, their faces pale with shock. "Robert, what is going on? Why are you shouting? You'll wake the neighbors." Elena's concern, as always, was for appearances. "Wake the neighbors," Robert laughed, a humorless, terrible sound. He stood up, his children secure in his arms, and stalked toward her, his eyes blazing with a fury she had never seen. "I want them to wake up. I want everyone to see what you've done. I don't know what you're talking about. I was just teaching Clara a lesson. She was disobedient, darling. A lesson in responsibility. It was her usual play, her weapon of manipulation. But this time, the words found no purchase. A lesson? Robert's voice was low, but it carried the weight of his entire empire, of his entire fortune, now focused on a single point. You call this a lesson? Putting an 8-year-old girl and a baby in a doghouse, in the rain. Do you have any idea what you've done? It was just for a few minutes, to make her understand discipline, she tried, taking a step back. Don't lie to me, he exploded, his control finally shattering. Not anymore. I built all of this. He gestured at the mansion, the grounds, the life of luxury around them. I spent years amassing this portfolio, trading stocks, making investments, worrying about crypto and gold and the dollar, all for their future, for their security. And while I was out there protecting our assets, you, the person I trusted most, were here, torturing my children. The confrontation played out right there, on the waterlogged lawn, under the gazes of the staff and the lights beginning to switch on in the neighboring houses. The humiliation Elena so feared was unfolding, and she was the star. Robert, you're overreacting. It's the stress of the trip. No, I'm seeing clearly. For the very first time. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. They will never suffer another second of your discipline. They will never be used in your power games again. Clara, my love, it's over, he said, looking down at his daughter, who was sobbing silently into his chest. It's over. He then raised his gaze to Eleanor, his face a mask of grim determination. Get your things. I don't want to see you in this house when the sun rises. Get out of my life. And more importantly, get out of my children's lives. Now, Elena stood frozen, the shock finally breaking her composure. The power, the status, the unlimited cash flow, it all vanished in that instant. She was just a woman standing in the rain, cast out of the paradise she had corrupted. Robert didn't wait for a reply. He turned and, with his children in his arms, walked back into the house, into the light and the warmth, leaving her behind in the darkness. As he crossed the threshold, his eyes met Lucy's, and he saw the small notebook she was discreetly holding. He gave a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement. The truth had more than one witness. Back in the warmth of the mansion, the outside world with its rain and darkness ceased to exist. Robert didn't delegate, didn't call for any staff. He personally carried his children to the largest, most luxurious bathroom in the house, filled the tub with warm, soapy water, and with a clumsy gentleness, bathed first Leo and then Clara. The hands that usually signed million-dollar contracts and analyzed the ROI of complex funds were now busy washing tiny arms and legs, detangling wet hair in an act of pure love and penance. After dressing them in the softest pajamas he could find, he brought them to his own bed, a vast and safe space, and tucked them in under the duvet. He made a bottle for Leo and a glass of warm milk with honey for Clara, sitting between them as they fed in silence. The only conversation was in his eyes, which begged for a forgiveness that words could not yet form. The next morning, the house seemed to breathe a new, lighter air. Elena's things had vanished silently in the pre-dawn hours. Her toxic presence was gone, leaving only the echo of a bitter memory. Robert, after a night spent watching his children sleep, made his first decision as a truly present father. He called Clara into her room and said, "This is your room, but I think it's missing something." Together, they redesigned the space. Leo's crib was moved from the other room and placed beside Clara's bed, not as a burden of responsibility, but as a symbol of their bond and mutual protection. They chose new colors for the walls, a wallpaper with stars that glowed in the dark, and a soft rug where they could play together. That room became their sanctuary, the true heart of the home. Lucy was summoned to her employer's office. She entered with a heavy heart, the little notebook in her hand, prepared for the worst. But Robert simply asked her to sit. "I know you looked after them, Lucy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I saw more than you realize. You risked your job for them, and for that, I am eternally grateful." He glanced at the notebook. "Keep that as a memento of your courage. Your family is now part of ours." She was not just kept on staff, she became an ally, a guardian of the new routine, helping Robert relearn the small, essential rituals of fatherhood. The weeks that followed were ones of reconstruction. Robert cancelled trips, postponed meetings. He dedicated his time, the most valuable asset he possessed, to his children. He learned the feeding schedules, helped Clara with her math homework, and discovered that making pancakes on a Saturday morning brought a kind of profit that no stock dividend ever could. The fortune he had amassed in cash, gold, and property finally found its purpose: to serve as the foundation for his family's happiness, not as a substitute for it. The regret of Elena, isolated and stripped of the status she cherished, was a dissonant note in a faraway place, no longer able to reach them. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after that terrible night, Robert took his children into the garden. Leo was taking his first wobbly steps on the grass, and Clara was running after him, her crystal laughter echoing in the air. The neighbors, as usual, watched from their porches and windows, curious about the new dynamic in the mansion. Robert knelt on the grass, took Clara's hand, and with Leo propped against his knee, he looked at the houses all around, at the silent witnesses to his old life of appearances. His voice was not loud, but it was clear and filled with an unshakable conviction, so that all who wished to hear could hear. "These 2 children are my greatest asset. Nothing else matters.